Imagine this. It's a bustling night in New York City, 1985. The infamous Limelight nightclub is alive with flashing lights, pounding music, and the chaotic energy of the city that never sleeps. It's a place where the weird and the wonderful blend seamlessly. But that night, something truly unexplainable happened. A man stumbled through the club's doors, disoriented, dressed like he walked straight out of the 1940s. His eyes were wide with panic, darting around as if everything around him was completely alien. He looked confused, mumbling something about the year being 1948. People thought it was a joke, a costume maybe. But there was something genuinely unsettling about him. When questioned, he gave a name that no one recognized: Rudolph Fentz. Just as quickly as he appeared, he bolted out of the club, vanishing into the neon-lit streets of Manhattan. Maybe he was just a drunk guy with a weird sense of fashion, right? But here's where it gets even stranger. A few decades later, in the early 2000s, a journalist researching strange disappearances stumbled upon declassified NYPD files that left her shaken. The files described a missing persons case from 1950, a man named Rudolph Fentz, who mysteriously disappeared from his New York apartment one evening. According to his wife, Rudolph had simply stepped out one night and never returned. What's truly eerie? The description of the man was identical to the one seen at the nightclub in 1985. Same name, same outdated clothing, same confusion about the modern world. It seemed impossible. How could someone who disappeared in 1950 just reappear 35 years later, unchanged? Fast forward to 2012, Times Square. Witnesses see a man dressed in vintage clothes, stumbling around in shock. Before anyone can help, he collapses to the ground. Paramedics arrive, but it's too late. He's dead from a heart attack. The ID they found in his pocket said, Rudolph Fentz. Not just that, medical records indicated that the man's body had aged naturally since the 1950s, despite his clothes and appearance remaining the same. What is going on here? Is this some bizarre coincidence or something much stranger? As more people dug into the story, more unsettling details seemed to emerge, as if the very act of searching for the truth was unraveling something deeper and darker. Some witnesses from the nightclub started to come forward, each with their own version of what happened that night in 1985. One woman, who had been a bartender at the club, claimed that Fentz didn't just appear out of nowhere. She insisted she saw him walk straight through a solid wall, as if the brick itself had briefly turned into liquid. Others swore that the air grew colder when he entered, and the smell of old tobacco and leather lingered long after he had vanished. One club-goer who had danced near Fentz that night insisted that he briefly saw a street from the 1940s shimmering behind the man, like a projection flickering in and out of existence. Most people dismissed these accounts as drunken delusions, but the stories began to paint a picture that went beyond a simple case of mistaken identity or confusion. A curious historian named Samuel Holt became fascinated with the story and decided to dig deeper. He spent weeks at the New York Public Library, combing through old microfilms and archives. His breakthrough came when he stumbled upon a police report from 1950 that described Fentz's disappearance from his apartment. The report mentioned that Fentz had left behind several peculiar items that puzzled investigators at the time. A collection of coins from the 1800s, a pocket watch with an inscription, and a series of letters written in a formal, almost poetic style. One letter in particular caught his attention. It was addressed to Fentz himself and appeared to have been written by his father. The letter spoke of the family's deep concern about Rudolph's increasingly erratic behavior and his obsession with the bending of moments and places. The bending of moments and places. It sounded almost like a poetic description of time itself folding. Holt couldn't get the phrase out of his head. He became obsessed with finding any surviving family members, hoping they could shed light on Rudolph's life before his disappearance. But his search was fruitless. No one seemed to know the Fentz family, and there were no recorded relatives or descendants. It was as if the man had been plucked out of history. Then there were more sightings. Sporadically, people reported seeing men dressed in outdated clothing wandering Times Square, looking confused and lost. Some claimed these figures would appear suddenly and then vanish just as quickly. Eyewitnesses described an overwhelming sense of dread, as if time itself had been distorted for a few seconds. One theory proposed by a physicist named Dr. Evelyn Marr suggested that Times Square might be a temporal hotspot, a place where the fabric of time is inherently weak or fractured. According to this theory, Fentz might not have been traveling through time voluntarily. Instead, he could have been caught in a temporal ripple, one that dragged him into different eras without his control. But then something even more bizarre happened. An old photograph from 1875 surfaced, showing a group of men gathered in Central Park. Among them was a man who looked eerily similar to Rudolph Fentz, right down to his distinctive mustache and slightly dazed expression. How could a man who vanished in 1950 appear in a photo from the 19th century? To this day, the story of Rudolph Fentz remains one of New York City's most baffling mysteries. Was he a time traveler caught in a loop, a victim of a government experiment gone wrong, or just a story that grew out of urban legend and coincidences? People who knew the story kept an eye on Times Square, especially on quiet nights. Sometimes when the city slowed down just enough, they would see a figure standing on the corner, dressed in outdated clothes, looking confused, as if trying to find his way home. But when anyone approached, he would be gone. Was Rudolph Fentz truly a man out of time, or just a figment of our collective imagination? One thing's for sure, reality, as we know it, might be far more fragile than we think.